Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I, Ken, read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. Our next letter comes from Heather, and Heather writes, I'm reaching out for advice about a challenging situation I've been dealing with for the past 10 months. I met someone, let's call him John, nearly 2 years ago, right after we both ended a long-term relationship. We made an immediate connection that was very strong. We spent nearly every day together, laughing, dancing, and genuinely enjoying each other's company. My friends often commented on how well we fit together. Unfortunately, John had to move back to his hometown and our relationship ended. The breakup was emotional. John expressed regret and he admitted he made a mistake but needed to focus on personal growth in his career. Although it was tough, I accepted his decision and tried to move on. Despite meeting others, I couldn't find the same level of connection. 6 months later, John reached out for advice and we decided to reconnect. Now, I was cautious and asked about the changes he'd made to be ready for a relationship. He provided detailed examples, so I decided to trust him. We resumed spending time together, going on dates and enjoying each other's company. John made several trips to see me and even spent time with my friends, which was reassuring. However, when the topic of defining our relationship came up, John seemed anxious and withdrawn. He questioned why we needed to rush and expressed concerns that he might not be able to give me what I deserved. I said I was willing to wait, but wouldn't compromise my own needs. Despite this, John showed his affection through thoughtful gestures like buying flowers and staying in touch regularly. Interesting. Bit of red flaggy sort of stuff going on here. When I visited him in his hometown, the trip felt like a turning point. He planned several dates, introduced me to friends, kissed me on the forehead, held my hand, and gave me reassurance. I was thrilled and shared my happiness with friends. However, communication became sporadic in the following weeks. Here we go. Given my anxious attachment style and past experiences with emotional stonewalling, long periods of silence were difficult for me. I had expressed my need for regular communication, and John appeared receptive. When I voiced concerns about his communication, he thought it was over and had even cried alone on a trip with friends, thinking that things between us had ended. A few days later, he sent a message saying his friend tried harming himself, and that in turn led to him needing to work on himself, and he felt that he was still emotionally unavailable. He felt it was best to focus on personal growth rather than being in a relationship where he couldn't fully commit. Interesting how he keeps using that as an excuse, isn't it? I told him I loved him, and he told me he thought he was there, but convinced himself it was not the time. I was heartbroken, but appreciated his honesty. We spoke on the phone for 5 hours, where he was inconsolably crying and expressed deep regret and felt he had let us both down. He shared he did not know how he'd do this without me. Where do I go from here? Did I read too much into this relationship? How do I heal when I always find that my love for others is met by disappointment? Great questions, Heather. All right, let's dive in. What an interesting experience you've got here. And I don't think that it's as honest as you believe it is in all areas of what this guy is saying. I think John is not entirely honest with you. I think he's sharing certain aspects of what's going on for him, but something tells me that there's more to this story than meets the eye. So let's go from the very beginning. Heather, you mentioned how John had ended the relationship, citing he needed to focus on personal growth in his career. And that was around the time when you'd also had people commenting on how well you fit together. And he simply just had to move back to his hometown and the relationship ended. Why? Why did it end? To me, I'm like, that's not enough of a reason to end a relationship. You know, you could have still both maintained degrees of contact and also involve one another. I feel like John's making some pretty big decisions about how this relationship needs to go. And he seems to be just coming back in whenever he feels like it. I understand that, look, life circumstances get in the way of a lot of things. I'm not denying that. But why did this relationship have to end when he had to move back to his hometown? Like, to me, I'm just like, couldn't you have done long distance for a period of time and tried to make it work? But yeah, strange. This thing about needing to focus on personal growth, I want to let you know I've heard many avoidants saying, just need to go work on myself. I'm in a dark place right now. I think I just need to work on my ADHD, anxiety. I think I have a problem, and they never will. And it's not to say that they may not speak to a clinician in the near distant future, but at this stage, they usually think there's something wrong with them. And then when they take that time apart from you, they usually temporarily feel better and conclude, oh, maybe it was the relationship's fault. What I find interesting is that it seems like he's acknowledging the fact that there is degrees of emotional unavailability in him, and he still needs to work on personal growth. Okay, here's the thing. He's not wrong. He needs to work on personal growth, but this is what I call a half truth. He keeps bringing this up as a reason as to why the relationship is ending. And I go back to why. That is not enough reason to break up a relationship. What are personal growth reasons? Unpack that for me. Do you need to start reading more self-help books? Do you need to speak with a therapist? Are you too triggered from previous relationships to be dating someone seriously? You don't obviously, if you are in this situation, need to give everything away to your partner, but at least involve them more in what personal growth means, because that is not enough of a reason to terminate a relationship twice, especially if you haven't worked on that. So, yeah, and it's interesting how, going back to what I said initially, the relationship's ending when he needs to move back to his hometown, also around the same time when friends are commenting on how good you both look together. And interestingly, how when you went to visit him in his hometown, you acknowledged that the trip felt like a turning point. And it's just interesting to me how, the communication is becoming sporadic. You brought it up with him and told him this, I need more communication than this. And good on you for doing that. But it's interesting how he seems to have this overreaction to you bringing this up as if to say, like, oh, I thought things were over between us when you brought this to my attention. It's like Heather was just bringing awareness of there being a lack of necessary communication in the relationship. She wasn't saying you're a bad partner. But it seems to me like he took that on board way too seriously, to the point of maybe being incredibly triggered by it. And I feel like there's some missing subtext here. Speculation time. I suspect that he did realize what he was doing and he was freaking out over the growing intimacy between the two of you. And I suspect that what was going on was that he was quietly catastrophizing, realizing, shit, 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 I can't give Heather what she wants. I'm a bad person. I don't feel like I'm going to be able to make this work. And then I think probably a combination of things, including the trip to the hometown and you bringing up the sporadic communication, probably caused him to have confirmation bias that things weren't working out. He is emotionally unavailable. He simply can't give you what you're looking for, hence the second breakup. I truly do believe that this guy has commitment issues based on this. This is, again, this is my opinion on this. But I personally think that there is something very wrong with him just deciding to come back of his own volition, you know, twice and not actually working on this, even though you had made it very clear from the sounds of it that you wanted something more committed with him. And you even mentioned you were cautious about changes he'd made to be ready for a relationship. I mean, you're doing all the right things in the sense of you're being very upfront with your boundaries, what you want. And it seems like he was, very keen to commit to those plans to make it work. And it seems like he doesn't want to let you go because he does have emotional investment in you. But it seems to me like his commitment issues are far greater than his capacity to love you without that getting in the way of it. So it's interesting too how, in relation to fear of commitment, he also became anxious when you wanted to bring up the excuse my English, when you wanted to define the relationship, that's when he became anxious and withdrawn and questioning, why do we need to rush this? I may not be able to give you what you deserve. A line that we have heard on so many occasions from similar sounding people. Yeah, it may not sound like someone who's obviously avoidant, but I'm going to go out of my way and say this guy is reading avoidant to me for sure. And I think that it's interesting how when, he's on one hand telling you he may not be able to give you what you're looking for, whilst also gift giving you flowers, giving you thoughtful gestures, and staying in touch regularly. That's confusing as fuck. And it's not okay. Listen, I want to make it clear, as I said earlier, I think this guy has positive feelings for you. I think he enjoys the connection, but I think he's even more scared of actually being with you and being made to feel like he can't give you what you're looking for. But by the way, I should also make it clear he's not done the sensible thing of being like, well, what is it that you're looking for? How can I facilitate this with you? What can I do to make this right for you? To me, I feel like he's just making a bunch of personal growth excuses, which is not to say he doesn't need personal growth. He absolutely does. But I think he's not being openly honest about what's really going on, which is the fact that I'm scared you will not want me if we're together. I think that's probably what's going on. And I think he's freaking out about what commitment actually means. And instead of actually going to therapy to work on it, he's just talking about working on it without taking those next steps. So yeah, not cool at all. I also find it interesting that around the second time things ended, he also sent a message about a friend that was harming themselves and that he needed to work on himself. It's like, okay, I acknowledge that his friend had harmed themselves. That's problematic. But why is that being connected to a breakup message? If I'm in a relationship with a guy and we're going through a tough time, I don't expect him to end the relationship on me because his best friend is going through a mental health crisis. I go back to what I was saying earlier about him needing to return to his hometown, citing that he needed to work on himself, but also that seems to be around the same time of him breaking up the relationship. It's like, bro, these are not valid reasons to terminate a relationship. It just seems to me like he's truly scared and freaking out. And I think that it's just odd that, I say odd, I get it from like, I understand the emotional context of this story, but I'm saying from a rational place, it's like, what? Like, why is he letting these seemingly small things be the basis to end things? But I think it's, again, from an irrational place, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because then he can distract himself with these big things that he's got on in his life and not focus on confronting his fear of fully committing. At least he was a little bit honest about that. But I still think he's talking in half truths and not talking about that, he's not talking about the rest of this stuff. And I think it's honest, yeah, English. I think it is understandably causing you to feel heartbroken. But yeah, I don't think he's being completely honest with you at all. And it's interesting how, he's speaking to you on the phone for 5 hours where he's inconsolably crying and expressing deep regret. To me, it makes me feel like he does not want to come across as a bad person. I wouldn't be surprised that the deep regret he was feeling was probably more for himself because he probably felt quite broken and about the fact that he couldn't commit to you. But let's talk about this. Where do you go from here? I suspect, speculation time, that you're going to hear back from him again in the near distant future. And I say that not to blow smoke up your ass, Heather, and say, like, oh, you're absolutely going to hear from him again, as if to say, have hope, he'll return. No, 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 no. We already know this guy has reached out again looking for advice, and that became the basis for which he then obviously started working with you to create the second part of this cycle and this relationship. So I suspect that what will probably happen is he may reach out again. I want to take this moment here to say, look, I am really sorry that you've gone through this because this does sound heartbreaking. And it does sound to me like this guy, for the most part, has great qualities to him, but he lets all of his fears get in the way of this relationship, which is just sad. It's not fair, especially for you. And I'm sure you see a beautiful guy in here, but he's letting his insecurities ruin a good thing. That leads me to talk about where do I go from here and another point. If I'm being realistic, I think this is it. I think that I can't tell you exactly what to do, but I can tell you that I think this is the lay of the land until he commits to therapy to work on his fear of commitment. Because if that's not changed, you're going to get more of this. And I have to be honest, this guy is definitely leaning in a direction of being dismissive, leaning, fearful, avoidant for me. In terms of, did I read too much into this relationship? Not at all. I don't think you did at all. I mean, in fact, if for being completely honest, I don't think you've read anything into this. You haven't mentioned here that you think, he's something that he's not. You've given me the facts. You've shared a lot of this stuff. I think, if anything, you've actually done the opposite, which is you've been incredibly understanding of him. Perhaps that's something to think about, because I know a lot of anxious attachers who work with me also have a very strong fawn response. So that's part of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn trauma responses. And trauma responses are insidious in that they often, are our adaptive strategies to what we had growing up in childhood. So I suspect from reading this, you're incredibly understanding, probably very empathetic, but that may be to your detriment if you're letting too much understanding come in, and you may have a fear of losing this guy. And as such, you're trying to be very accommodating where possible. That's a speculation from my side about this. May not be applicable to you, Heather, but that's what I'm hearing. And then when you've got, how do I heal when I always find that my love for others is met by disappointment? This links to what I just said. So I don't know you personally. I don't know your full circumstances. It would be inappropriate of me to be like, well, you're codependent, you have attachment issues. We know you have an anxious attachment. But like, I don't know you with full context, except for one thing you've mentioned here, which is my love for others is met by disappointment. So it sounds like that's been a pattern. That's really interesting. So to me, when I hear that, if you were my client, I'd be like, okay, well, has this theme occurred in parts of your childhood, school, family, environment, culture, etc.? Has there been this theme where you feel like you overgive and underreceive? Have you felt like there have been moments where you've poured into people who've only let you down in the end? Now, if that's the case, it links to what I said before about the fawn response, in that you may be a giver. And if that is the case, part of the healing work involves therapy, but also is about reducing that fear of abandonment that you need to overgive in order to receive love. It's also about deconditioning your brain to find people like this attractive, and finding people who are actually at your level, and learning with love to turn some of these people away who need to work on their stuff. They're not for you. I find a lot of us who live in the fawn response can be way too understanding with people who, have a lot of valid mental and emotional health challenges. They deserve help, but that's not our role. We're not therapists unless we're paid for it. And that leads me to say, if you find that your love for others is met by disappointment, that would suggest one major other thing to me, which is you probably have a lot of unresolved grief and also loneliness inside of you, likely a lot of emotional neglect. This is what I've noticed across a lot of my clients, myself included, in terms of overcoming a lot of this stuff, which is, I think we relate to these particular people, particularly avoidantly attached people, because apart from there being that familiarity, we also can recognize a lot of that shared pain, misery, loneliness inside of them that we also neglect to resolve inside of ourselves. And so I think every time we have an encounter with someone like this, it just adds to that horrible feeling of neglect, abandonment, betrayal, being let down. And a lot of that stuff needs to be healed over time to get to a point where you no longer feel like you're being let down by others. And you're also being protected. A lot of this stuff, in my experience, can come down to mother-father related challenges, the mother and father wound, for want of a better expression. So, yeah, that's probably where I'd start. Easier said than done, takes years to work on it. But I do think it's a process. And as you work on it over time, you may find that people like this are neither attracted to you nor are you attracted to them. So that's where I'd say go forth from there. If any of that's obviously applicable, again, this is me just reading into, now this is me reading into what you've shared. So that's what I would say. All right. Thank you, Heather, for sharing this letter. I am so sorry that you've gone through this because it does sound terrible that, you've had this cycle happen twice. And I can tell you love the guy. And he probably loves you too. Well, not probably, I reckon he absolutely does love you based on what you've shared with me too. But his fears are greater than his love at this stage. In any case, I'm just wrapping up here to say to anyone who enjoyed this, if you could leave a review for this episode, that would be amazing. You can do so on Spotify. Finally, if any of you are interested in submitting a letter, just as a reminder, the availability will happen mid-October, where you can upload your letter there. I'm raising the rates for that. I'm only taking 12 on board because it becomes a little bit hectic for me to have 30 letters to get through in a month. I need my time and space. But I'm just continuing to work and find a system that really works for me, for you, so I can make the most out of this as well too. And also not burn out, because that's another huge thing for me as well. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this episode today. And I look forward to seeing you all for the next letter reading that I do, likely tomorrow. Now, there are just a few extra details that I was asked to just mention with regards to this letter. One, this person told me that they often had told their friends and cousins he would love to have a girlfriend soon and seemed genuinely excited about it, which is pretty confusing given everything that happened. He'd also constantly told me how excited he was to see me again, literally told me this a few days before he sent me the ending message. During our 5-hour phone call, he was able to give me so much reassurance, which is frustrating because this was all I was asking for. I want to take a moment here to say this is one of the most frustrating details of dealing with someone who's avoidantly attached is, when they're shutting down and they're giving you the bare minimum, and then if you're pulling away or they broke up with you, it's like they suddenly come alive and do everything that you've ever asked them to do. It can be maddening because it's like, oh, so you are perfectly capable of giving me the thing that you said you couldn't do or that you simply weren't showing me at the time. And it can make you feel like they've got time and energy for other people, but not for you. It can feel intentional. It can genuinely feel like this person is being malicious against me. And I won't hold that to anyone who feels that way because it is really very, very offensive to see how they can suddenly give you everything that you've been after when the relationship is starting to end on the rocks. You're deciding to pull away from them because of their bad behavior and so on and so forth. Anyways, a further point here is, which is the question, how can someone's emotional availability change so drastically? He was able to give me all that I wanted at the beginning of the month and then barely anything at the end. Fear of intimacy. So I know it's baffling and it's really hard to understand conventionally because a lot of us don't have the same emotional experience of that of an avoidant attacher. But just to break it down and explain for anyone who's, got similar sort of questions, when someone, the best analogy that I can put, that I can use for this is think about a time you've enjoyed a food like cake that has an allergen and you've reacted quite violently to that cake that you would normally love. It is very normal for someone who has got, a lot of love for food to then have a pretty big reaction where they might be throwing away that item of food that they once enjoyed because they can't stand the ingredient. And they may end up over time developing I suppose, a sense of longing for that food that they once enjoyed in the hopes that the same allergen won't be present the next time round. Now, with avoidance, they don't so much have an allergy to connection as such as they more have a lot of panic. And that panic causes them to do silly, silly things. Whenever they're experiencing a lot of this panic and rumination, they tend to try and suppress and compartmentalize. And then they also start to lose a lot of emotional feelings for someone that they're with. And they also can become quite disassociated and feel that suddenly they're no longer into their partner as well, too. So their systems for navigating emotional distress can quite literally convince them that they're no longer in love with their partner, and can also cause them to be quite disgusted, bothered, and even just completely out of love with you temporarily, because they're trying to manage all that intense emotion inside of them. But it's not something that you'd consciously be thinking about. It happens very automatically for a lot of these people. And it's pretty exhausting to be someone who has to have a brain that's behaving in this particular way. But as everyone who's been through this knows, it's absolutely emotionally devastating to be on the receiving end of this. I can see another point here. He has posted a lot following the breakup of him having a good time. Is this just performative to prove to himself he made the right choice, or is he actually feeling some of the freedom or weight lifted? My answer is both. A lot of avoidance post breakup feel tremendous relief. They're like, yep, problem solved. I'm better now. And then eventually they'll get to a point where all that guilt, shame, and emotion, that love for you returns. But often, usually on social media, off the back of it, they often feel like that was the right choice for me. I'm feeling so much better now. And a lot of them are also trying to convince themselves they made the right choice. And social media is one such outlet that they try and convince the world at large that they made the right decision. It's really hurtful when you're on the receiving end of this because it can make you feel like, God, what did this person, what, like, did I do something so offensive that this person's reacting this way? The answer is no. They just got way too uncomfortable being that intimate with you. Is there any way I could have expressed my needs without him responding with distance? I mean, you could have tried, like doing some of the traditional nonviolent communication stuff like, hey, I've noticed that there's a bit of silence between us, or there's not as much engagement from you as there normally had been. Is there a way for us to work on this together so that way we're able to try and have a more intimate relationship? But I mean, like off the back of that, I'd be interested to hear how he responded off the back of that, meaning that you can do all the non-violent communication. Hell, you can even set ultimatums. But if this person is so sensitive to feedback, to attempts to repair the relationship, and they're not willing to work on their side of the street, I don't think you have much power to convince someone to really be able to step it up unless they want to. So I think there's an opportunity for improvement, but I also think it's not all on you to facilitate this. Is it normal to feel numb or cognitive dissonance from yourself following a breakup like this? Oh, God, yeah. I don't know if it's because I'm in shock, disbelief, or just feel like my brain has had so much mental gymnastics that I cannot process it, or I've taken on the avoidant feelings of ignoring my emotions. Maybe I'm also invalidating my own feelings because it was just a situationship, so it feels silly to grieve over it. I can understand that. And I was actually commenting to a close mate about my experience like of this 5 years ago, which is to say, I think that if we take a step back from this, right? Yes, it's a situationship. And you're probably grieving harder over this than any other relationship. Conventional thinking would say situationships aren't a real relationship, therefore you have nothing to cry about. Couldn't be further from the truth. You had something with this guy, and even though it ended terribly, and it also had potential, emotionally speaking, to be something more than what it was, I think that it's one of those things where we have to do a lot of unlearning. We have to unlearn conventional relationship thinking. We have to have a lot of compassion and love for ourselves off the back of this, which is bloody hard when you've gone through an experience where you might be blaming yourself for what's happened. And The cognitive dissonance piece is so real because often the way people like your ex-partner behave is in such a way where it can make it seem like you're the problem. You did something wrong when it was never communicated that you had done anything wrong. It's never something that you hashed out properly. It was something that, this person just decided to do of their own volition. So it's really not okay, how you've gone through this experience. And I think it is just one of those things where it's very normal to feel that. And as for the feelings of being numb, that's a sign to me that you're in deep, 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 probably depression at the moment with everything. And you're probably trying to force yourself not to feel a lot of the pain that you're feeling. You will have to go through that eventually. But I'm just letting you know that can be a bit of a warning sign to me for potential things like suicidal ideation and other, stuff where you might try and like numb your emotions through workaholism and a bunch of other things. But I'm just letting you know that, yes, it is very normal to feel that way off the back of this. So I am sorry that you've gone through this because it is terrible. And unfortunately, it is very common to experience some of the things that you're talking about there.